I never thought I'd be the kind of man who could live with a secret like that. For a long time, I didn't even know how to name it. It wasn't anger. It wasn't denial. It was something quieter, heavier. The kind of truth that settles into your chest and just stays there, changing the way you breathe without making a sound. My wife and I had been married for 8 years. Her name is Melissa. We met in our late 20s, both working ordinary jobs, both thinking we'd found something solid in each other. Not fireworks, not chaos, just stability. And for a while, that was enough. Our son, Jacob, was born 3 years into the marriage. I remember the day clearly. The hospital room, the exhaustion, the way Melissa cried when they placed him in her arms. I cried too. I didn't question anything. Why would I? That was my child. That was my family. I was there for everything. Late night feedings, diaper changes, first steps, first words. I learned how to calm him down when he cried in a way Melissa couldn't. I memorized his routines, his fears, the way he liked his bedtime stories read in the same order every night. I built my life around being his father. The truth didn't come out in some dramatic confrontation. No accusations, no shouting, no sudden discovery of messages on a phone. It came quietly, through something so small it almost felt ridiculous at first. A routine medical appointment. Jacob needed blood work done before starting school. Nothing serious, just standard paperwork. I went with him because Melissa had a work emergency. I didn't think anything of it at the time. The doctor glanced at the chart, paused, and asked a casual question about family medical history. Then another, and another. Nothing alarming, just careful. At the end of the visit, she mentioned something about blood types that didn't line up. She wasn't accusing. She wasn't dramatic. She just said, "Sometimes records are wrong, but it might be worth double-checking." I nodded, smiled, thanked her, and took my son for ice cream like nothing had happened. But that sentence stayed with me. That night, after Jacob fell asleep, I sat alone in the kitchen staring at nothing. I didn't confront Melissa. I didn't ask questions. I didn't want answers I wasn't ready to carry. A week later, I ordered a DNA test. Not through the mail. Through a private lab. Quiet. Discreet. I told myself I was just being thorough. Responsible. That it would put my mind at ease. The results came back 3 days later. I remember exactly where I was standing when I read them. I remember how my hands felt numb before my brain even caught up. 0% probability of paternity. No margin. No confusion. No room for interpretation. Jacob wasn't biologically mine. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't confront my wife. I closed the email, put my phone down, and sat there in silence while the house slept around me. Because as shocking as the truth was, the thought that broke me wasn't about blood or betrayal. It was this: what do I do now without destroying a child who believes I'm his father? So I said nothing. I didn't tell anyone. Not Melissa. Not my parents. Not my closest friend. I carried that knowledge alone, like something radioactive that would poison everything it touched if I let it out. For weeks, I watched my wife with new eyes. Every smile felt different. Every casual touch carried weight. I replayed old moments in my head, searching for signs I might have missed. Late nights, she blamed on work. Weekend trips she took alone. Little inconsistencies I'd brushed off because trust makes you generous with explanations. But I didn't confront her. I couldn't. Because every time Jacob ran toward me yelling, "Dad," the truth stopped mattering in the way people think it should. He didn't know. He couldn't know. To him, I was his father. Biology didn't tuck him in at night. I did. So I stayed. I told myself I'd figure it out later. That I just needed time. That maybe there was a way to protect him without blowing up everything he'd ever known. Melissa eventually noticed something was off. I was quieter. More distant. Not cold, just careful. She asked once if I was stressed about work. I said yes. She asked if I was unhappy. I said no. Both were lies, but not the kind that felt cruel. More like necessary. Life kept moving forward in a strange, suspended way. School drop-offs. Family dinners. Birthday parties. pictures taken and posted online with captions about how lucky we were. I smiled in every photo. Inside, something hardened. I started paying closer attention to how Melissa talked about Jacob, the words she used, the way she framed responsibility, the subtle shift in tone when discipline came up. She loved him, no doubt about that. But there were moments, small ones, where it felt like she knew something I didn't, or thought she did. Months passed, then a year, then two. I raised that boy like nothing had changed. I helped with homework, coached his little league team, sat through parent-teacher conferences. When he got sick, I stayed up all night beside his bed. When he was scared, he came to me. There were nights I'd sit in his room after he fell asleep, watching him breathe, wondering if I was a coward or a hero for staying silent. I never told Melissa what I knew. Not once. And part of me believed, foolishly, that maybe my silence meant something. That maybe the secret would stay buried forever. I didn't realize that silence doesn't protect you. It only delays the moment someone decides to use it against you. The first time Melissa used Jacob against me, it was subtle enough that I almost missed it. We were arguing about something small. Money, I think. I wanted to cut back on some expenses. She wanted to book a trip with her friends. Normal couple stuff. Voices raised, but nothing explosive. Then she said it. Well, if you walk away, remember you're the one abandoning your son. Not our son. Your son. The word choice landed wrong. It stuck in my chest. I didn't respond right away, and she noticed. Her eyes flicked to my face, just for a second, like she was checking something. I told myself I was being paranoid. But after that, it started happening more often. Anytime I pushed back, anytime I disagreed, anytime I set a boundary, Jacob suddenly became part of the conversation. Not emotionally, strategically. You know how much he needs stability. Don't do this in front of him. You don't want to confuse him, do you? Always framed like concern. Always wrapped in the language of good parenting. And every time, I backed down. Because the truth was, she was right about one thing. Jacob did need stability. And I wasn't willing to risk hurting him just to win an argument. That's when I realized something had changed. I wasn't just staying silent anymore. I was being managed. Melissa started making decisions without including me, signing Jacob up for activities, changing schedules, planning things, and informing me after the fact. If I questioned it, she'd sigh and say I was making things difficult. Once, during a particularly tense argument, she crossed a line she couldn't uncross. She looked me straight in the eye and said, "You know, if you ever tried to leave, I don't think you'd have much of a case." The room went quiet. She didn't explain. She didn't have to. She knew. Or at least, she thought she did. I asked her what she meant, keeping my voice steady. She shrugged, like it was obvious. Like we were both aware of the same unspoken truth. "Jacob's mine," she said. "You're not on his birth certificate for nothing. Courts care about biology." That was the moment the ground shifted. Not because she'd said it, but because she'd said it confidently. I didn't argue. I didn't react. I just nodded and let the conversation die. That night, after everyone went to bed, I sat alone in the living room and finally allowed myself to admit something I'd been avoiding for years. Staying silent hadn't protected Jacob. It had given Melissa leverage. And if I didn't act, carefully, quietly, intelligently, she was going to use my love for that child to control the rest of my life. After that conversation, I stopped reacting. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood the rules of the game I was in. Melissa thought she had control because she believed I was trapped. She believed my silence meant weakness, that my attachment to Jacob made me predictable. So I let her believe it. On the surface, nothing changed. I still packed Jacob's lunch, still helped with homework, still showed up to school events, still played the role of the dependable father figure who never raised his voice and never rocked the boat. But internally, something had shifted. I started paying attention to details I'd ignored before. Dates, language, patterns. I noticed how Melissa only brought up biology when she was losing an argument. How Jacob was never mentioned as not mine when it came to responsibilities, only when it came to power. I also noticed something else. She was careless. She assumed I was too afraid to look too closely, too emotionally invested to question anything, too busy protecting everyone else to protect myself. That assumption gave me room. Late at night, after Melissa went to bed, I started organizing things. Quietly, methodically, not out of anger, out of necessity. I gathered documents, school records, medical forms, emails, messages, anything that showed one undeniable truth. I had been Jacob's father in every way that mattered. Doctor visits I attended, teacher emails addressed to me, emergency contacts listing my number first, photos, years of them, evidence of consistency. I wasn't planning anything dramatic. I wasn't plotting revenge. I was preparing for reality. Because whether Melissa knew it or not, she had already forced my hand. Once someone threatens to take away the person you love most, the relationship is already over. It just hasn't caught up on paper yet. What finally confirmed everything wasn't another argument. It was Jacob. One evening, while I was tucking him into bed, he asked me a question that nearly broke me. "Dad, are you going to leave like Uncle Ryan did?" I froze. Ryan was Melissa's brother. Divorced. Barely saw his kids anymore. Melissa used him as an example whenever she talked about how unfair courts were to men. I asked Jacob why he thought that. He hesitated, then said, "Mom said sometimes dads leave when things get hard." I sat there in the dark, staring at a future Melissa was quietly shaping in his mind. One where I was temporary, conditional, replaceable. That night, after Jacob fell asleep, I went back to the living room and sat in silence for a long time. That was the moment I stopped asking myself if I should leave, and started asking myself how to do it without losing him forever. Because the truth was clear now. I wasn't staying for love anymore. I was staying because I was being threatened. And the moment love turns into leverage, the only way to protect it is to stop letting the other person control the rules. The final straw didn't come during a fight. It came on an ordinary Tuesday. I was late getting home from work because my manager had pulled me into an unexpected meeting. Nothing dramatic, just one of those things that happens. I texted Melissa to let her know I'd be about 30 minutes late. When I walked through the door, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Jacob wasn't in the living room. His backpack wasn't by the couch. The TV wasn't on. That uneasy feeling settled in my stomach immediately. I found Melissa in the kitchen, scrolling on her phone like nothing was wrong. I asked where Jacob was. She didn't look up. "He's with his real father tonight." The words landed like a punch I didn't see coming. I asked her what she meant, even though I already knew. She finally looked at me then, calm, composed, almost satisfied with my reaction. She said Jacob's biological father had picked him up after school, that they were bonding, that she thought it was important Jacob started understanding where he really comes from. I asked why she didn't tell me. She shrugged. "I didn't think I needed your permission." That's when she said it. The sentence that ended everything. "If you keep pushing back like this, maybe it's better Jacob spends more time with people who are actually his family." I felt something in me go completely still. Not rage, not panic, clarity. This wasn't a threat born from emotion. This was calculated, controlled. She'd waited for the right moment. When I was late, unprepared, vulnerable. She knew exactly what she was doing. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I didn't say anything that could be twisted later. I just asked one question. "When will he be back?" She said maybe tomorrow, maybe the weekend. She wasn't sure yet. That night, I slept in the guest room. Not because I was avoiding her, but because I needed space to think without my emotions drowning out logic. At 3 a.m., I sat at the edge of the bed and made a decision that terrified me and steadied me at the same time. I was done living under threat. If Jacob was going to be used as a weapon, then I had to make sure no one could pull the trigger again. The next morning, I didn't confront Melissa. I went to work. On my lunch break, I made a call I'd been avoiding for years. A family law attorney. I didn't tell her everything right away. I just asked one question. What rights does a non-biological father have if he's been the primary parent for years? The silence on the other end lasted a second longer than I expected. Then she said, "That depends on what you can prove." I looked down at my notebook, at the list I'd already been building. And for the first time since learning the truth about Jacob's DNA, I realized I wasn't powerless anymore. I didn't tell Melissa about the lawyer. I didn't threaten her. I didn't warn her. I didn't give her time to prepare a counterstory. I did exactly what she'd been counting on me not doing. I stayed calm. Over the next 2 weeks, I moved like someone who had already accepted the end, because I had. I documented everything. School pickups. Messages where she acknowledged I was Jacob's father in every way except biology. Times she depended on me. Times she trusted me. And then, one evening, Melissa made a mistake. She sent me a message she didn't think I'd keep. "If you don't stop questioning things, I'll make sure Jacob doesn't see you again." That sentence changed everything. The lawyer told me it was more than enough. When Melissa finally noticed something was different, it was already too late. I wasn't reacting anymore. I wasn't asking permission. I wasn't negotiating. I served the papers quietly. No shouting. No dramatic confrontation. Just a calm explanation that I was filing for separation and that any further communication about Jacob would go through my attorney. She laughed at first. Then she read the documents. That's when her face changed, because buried inside all the paperwork was something she never expected: a petition recognizing me as Jacob's psychological parent. Years of proof. Years of presence. Years she herself had created without realizing it. She accused me of betrayal. I didn't argue. I told her the truth. "You stopped being my wife the moment you used my love for him as leverage." The court process wasn't fast. It wasn't dramatic. But it was fair. And in the end, the judge said something I'll never forget. Biology matters, but consistency matters more. I didn't take Jacob away from his mother. I just made sure she could never threaten to take him away from me again. Jacob still calls me dad. Not because I demanded it. Not because a document says so. But because I showed up, even when it cost me everything. Melissa doesn't speak to me anymore. Through lawyers only. Sometimes I see the regret in her eyes at school events, when she realizes the control she thought she had slipped away the moment she crossed that line. And as for me, I learned something painful, but necessary. Love doesn't mean staying silent forever. And being patient doesn't mean allowing yourself to be controlled. Sometimes the strongest move isn't walking away in anger. It's waiting until you're calm enough to walk away with everything that truly matters.